Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov, and it's great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. Today, our presenter will share how marketers can fine-tune their measurement strategies to get the campaign insights they crave without cookies. This is such a hot topic right now. And let's meet our presenter. He's actually live in studio with me, my very special guest from Captify. We have Isaac Gerber, Director of Commercial Insights for North America. Isaac, so good to see you.
Thrilled to be here, Marissa.
So happy to have you with us. And we're also so happy to have all of you from our audience with us. So you may have some questions for Isaac during the presentation today. So keep it conversational with us. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions you have, just use the chat window on the right side of your screen at any time. We will do our best to get to as many of those questions as we can, so keep them coming. It is now time to get started. I can't wait. Isaac, over to you.
Thank you, Marissa. So thrilled to be here. As I mentioned, we're going to have a wonderful conversation about revolutionizing your measurement strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about some tried and true methods and some really fundamentals when it comes to measurement framework. And then we're going to talk about how we bring it into the modern era and how we're going to blend those techniques together to give you bulletproof measurement. We're going to talk really from the perspective of the evolution of that from the past to the present, those key strategies, and then we're going to talk about it from the perspective of a few specific case studies. And at the end, as Marissa mentioned, there will be some time for questions. So please do start adding those in. So jumping right in here, brand measurement has come a long way. Back from the Paleolithic era of measurement, thinking about the basic tools, looking at basic metrics and understanding really activity, not outcomes. From there, looking at things like attribution modeling, understanding specific silo measurement, really things in pieces that don't give you the picture of the whole. Moving forward towards more modern things like marketing automation platforms, customer data platforms, all these platforms that really the idea is they're giving you what they say is a holistic view of what's going on with your customers, what's going on with your brand, but there's still some challenges inherent with these tools, with these kind of turnkey solutions. And there's two big things that are true about modern measurement, especially when we think about brand. One is that a lot of it is still relying on the third-party cookie. And a lot, especially when we talk about brand measurement, is still relying on surveys and brand studies, which is just one fancy way of saying a survey. So what's the problem with that? Let's talk about cookies. We all know that there's an upcoming cookie-geddon, that Google Chrome is going to phase out third-party cookies. Before that, Firefox and iOS and Apple have already phased out third-party cookies, which means that if you want measurement that is inclusive of what's going on mobile, on an iPhone, if you want measurement that's inclusive of what's going on a Firefox browser, really there's a whole 40% and growing amount that today does not have cookies. We're also talking about cookies because they really give you a sense of what's going on in just a digital landscape. But there's other channels like CTV, like digital out of home, regular out of home, linear TV, these other channels that don't have obviously the concept of a cookie at all. But even more broad than that, cookies are a real challenging form for measurement because it's about trying to create a fingerprint for identity. And identity is really tough. It's really tough in the best scenario. And Marissa, this reminds me of a story that I think you'll appreciate. So I was reading online the other day that there was this prominent analyst who was hired to do this study looking at a retailer's rewards program. So people come into the store, they swipe the rewards card, and they get some money off. And what the retailer gets is the data. They get to understand who you are, and they get to look at trends. And what they saw was there were these whales, people who were spending so much money on these programs, an order of magnitude more than the average customer. And then sometimes multiple orders in a single day in a physical brick and mortar retailer. And so they hired him to come in and say, hey, we have to know everything there is to know about these whales. Tell us, who are these people? What do they look like? How can we get more of them? And you want to know what he found these so-called whales were? Do you have any guesses?
So you're tripping me up with multiple times a day in the same store, because my guess would have been a high net worth individual spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
But what's the answer?
Yeah, it's a good guess. But what it turns out is it was cashiers. It was cashiers. Have you ever been in a situation where you're in this retailer and you forget your loyalty card and they volunteer to use theirs?
Yeah, I like every day.
Exactly. And so it's good because you get the discount, but what you don't get, what the retailer doesn't get, is they don't get the data about who the purchaser was. And so you think about that, a physical card in a physical store, the challenges of understanding the identity and really properly mapping that in that scenario, you can just think about how that extends to the digital world. Well, it's not a physical card. It's a piece of code in your browser that's very fragile, very flimsy. It doesn't account for different devices and all of this. So obviously cookies, even though they're not technically gone today, we can't rely on them today. So we need a solution that scales beyond cookies. So what else is there? There's surveys. So a very common and very powerful form of brand measurement are surveys, doing brand studies. You say how likely, are you familiar with these brands? When you think of this category, what brands are you familiar with? You get your unaided, your aided awareness. Yeah, you get purchase intent, all of these really powerful statistics, and you do it in a way and you get so many results back and you have statistical significance and all of this, and you can ask anything you want. And surveys are very powerful as a result because they're so customizable. You can ask anything you want and you can get an answer that meets that statistical significance. So ultimately, I do like surveys, but I also hate surveys. Why do I hate surveys? Well, what surveys are telling you is what people say. They are not giving you a clear indication of what people do. They're answering a question that's not an indication of something that they actually care about. We don't know how much they care about it. But even that even that aside, it's very prone to certain biases. For example, a big one is non-participation bias. So what that means is when your survey goes out, a lot of people are not going to respond. And if you're actively doing surveys, I'm sure you can relate to this, where you get an X% response rate. Now, the problem is there's probably some important data that you are missing because people, an important swath, did not respond to your survey. And that could lead to a bias in your resulting analysis, where there's important stuff that is skewing the data because those people didn't respond to the survey. Okay. Cookies are out, surveys are out. Where does that leave us? Well, let's go back to the fundamentals and really understand and talk about what is measurement. How do we succeed in doing measurement? And it comes down to setting up an experiment. At the end of the day, any kind of measurement, any kind of a good measurement is going to be an experiment where you have a concept of a campaign exposure. That's what you're varying, people seeing the campaign or not, and you see what's the result. And so in order to have that set up and really understand and do a valid measurement program, there's three things you need to keep in mind. The first one, which is one of the most key ones, is aligning up front on the goals of your campaign. Finding out at the 11th hour that the campaign has these certain goals that we're not set up to measure, that we're not really looking at, is going to be very challenging. It's going to be very problematic. So one of the most important things is ensure that you're up front have gone through the process of aligning on that goal of your campaign before it starts, which brings me to item number 2 here. Make sure you're running a campaign that can reasonably move the needle on the goals that you're trying to measure. It sounds sensible, but I think that all of us can think about situations where we've maybe been asked to do something like understand the improvement in our lead generation from a direct mail campaign with a coupon code. That is not a good campaign for that goal. If you're sending a direct mail with a coupon code, you're more likely to see sales because that's what that is geared to drive, less than, for example, signing up folks on your lead forms. So making sure that your campaign is going to actually move the needle on the goals you're trying to do. It sounds simple, it sounds basic, but it's incredibly important because this isn't something that you can change during the campaign. This is something that needs to be done before your campaign launches. Now, if you're in a pure analytics role, if you're pure insight role, if you're on the measurement side, not on the campaign strategy side, you're not the one making the call on this. You can influence that decision. And so my suggestion to you is work with that strategist, work with whoever's making the decision on the campaign and on the goals to see if you can influence that decision and make sure that you're being set up for success. Because there's nothing worse than coming in and at the 11th hour realizing that you don't have any good results to show, not because the campaign wasn't effective, but because it wasn't effective at the goal that your company cares about. Now, if you are on a strategy side or a planning side, and you do have the ability to influence what the goals are, what the campaign is, it's a wonderful opportunity to make sure you're working closely with your strategy, with your insights team, with your measurement team, because I guarantee you, if you bring them in and include them as a part of the process of setting up your campaign, not only are they going to love you for that, but they're also going to help you have more successful campaigns. So it truly is a win-win proposition. Now, let's say you have one, you have two, let's talk about three here. And this is where we're going to spend the rest of our conversation today, talking about data, talking about ensuring you have the right data to measure the outcome of your campaign, and that it's actually driving the performance that you want and that you can measure it. So let's talk about data. What we've found is that search data is incredibly powerful. It really provides a window into what people care about, because at the end of the day, when people perform a search on their computer, they care about the topic. They're not performing the search because they're looking to influence anything else. They're performing a search because they want to complete a task related to that brand. They want to find more about the brand. It's a very genuine and direct way of understanding what people care about, how people care about them, about that topic. And by understanding how that search behavior changes over time, and even more than that, how that search behavior is influenced by your campaign, you can really powerfully understand the effect of your campaign in changing not only what people think about your brand, but how they think about it. We've done some research on this. I'm going to talk through a few examples in a moment, but at the end of this, everyone who joined our conversation today is going to get a copy of some research that we've had published in a peer-reviewed Journal of Applied Marketing Analytics about search, using search to understand sentiment towards your brand, and a metric called net searcher sentiment, which is a replacement for Net Promoter Score. We're going to talk about all of that in another moment, because I also want to bring in the tried and true aspect of it, which is location data. Location data and running experiments focused on geographies has been a foundational aspect of so-called traditional advertising for decades. You have billboards, you have linear TV, you have these campaigns running in certain geographies, and you see the change that it has on your brand in different ways. And by running a good geo-based experiment with strong holdouts, strong setup, strong methodology, you can really understand the change that happens in market as a result of that campaign being in market. Now, the power is bringing these two pieces together. By looking at campaigns that run in specific geographies, and then looking at the resulting search behavior in those geographies, we can bring the power of digital measurement and understanding things like sentiment, understanding things like brand, not only awareness, but brand perception, and how that changes in those exposed geographies can give you a tremendous amount of very targeted, very powerful insight in how your brand is doing overall, but how is it doing as a result of that campaign you just spent perhaps millions of dollars running. So let's talk about a few specific examples. The first one here is a prominent outdoor lifestyle brand that had some new products they were bringing in. Not only that, they were launching a campaign to change the association of their brand, both with the brand overall, as well as some specific attributes about the product. And they were running this campaign nationally using CTV. They came to us and said, how can we understand the effect that this campaign had in changing people's perception of our brand and our top products? So what we did, thinking about and bringing together all those pieces that I just mentioned, we looked at specific holdout markets compared to the top markets where the campaign ran in CTV based on geography. We looked at the search behavior in those two areas, and we pieced out what was the change in consumer search behavior based on that campaign. And the results are very powerful. What we saw was that in market, the folks who saw the campaign were 19% more likely to search for the brand. Not only that, but they were 27% more likely to search for the top product mentioned in that campaign. And then diving in more detail to some of the specific attributes about this brand, there were over 400%, 447% more likely to search for specific features about the product, really indicating not only a desire and an interest in the brand overall, but a desire and interest in the specific product and learning more about it. They searched 155% around the theme of portability, which was a key message in the campaign. And they searched 62% more for customization as it relates to the top product in the campaign. Moving on, our next case study here, we worked with a prominent blue chip brand that was running a digital out-of-home campaign. And this campaign had a very specific message that they wanted to get to market. And what they wanted to understand was how much did that message resonate with consumers? How much did it improve their sentiment towards the brand? And they also wanted to get a sense of a competitive review. Did this do anything not only for their brand, but did it affect what was the relationship in the campaign to their competitors? So similarly, what we did here is we did a geo-match study, a match market study, looking at search behavior in those markets that had the campaign versus the other markets. We combined those to understand the searches that happened and ultimately bring back and understand to the client a report of here's the result of your campaign. And if you've worked in out-of-home, even digital out-of-home, you know that really bringing these pieces together to provide strong intelligence, not only about who saw the campaign, but resulting improvement in their brand is a very challenging exercise. But what we were able to see was those who saw the campaign had a 160% increase in overall awareness of the brand, a 30% increase in net searcher sentiment towards the brand. I'll talk about that in a little more detail in just a second, and a 233% increase in awareness of that key brand message. So there was a very specific message in that campaign, and the folks who saw the campaign, we saw search for their brand and that message over 200% more than those who did it. Not only that, but we saw that in the markets that saw the campaign, they were actually significantly less likely to search for their key competitor. They actually searched for their competitor about 90% less than the markets that didn't see the campaign. So not only were we able to have a measurement program here that allowed our client to better understand the benefit of their campaign in their own brand building, but we're able to show how that campaign effectively crowded out interest in a key competitor. Very powerful results, only possible through the combination of location as well as search data. I have one more example, and then we're going to open it up to questions, as Marissa mentioned. So our last example here is talking about a prominent services company. And what they were looking to do, ultimately, is shift in-market sentiment about their brand. And this was a real strong opportunity for us to leverage net searcher sentiment. I mentioned you'll all be getting our research paper on net searcher sentiment, but to really outline at a high level what it is, it's intended as a replacement for Net Promoter Score. If you're not familiar with Net Promoter Score, it's a prominent metric that's been around for about 25 years that looks at using surveys to understand folks' loyalty towards a brand by asking, and I'm sure all of you, if you have not administered a Net Promoter Score study, you've certainly seen the question many times in your life. It says, how likely are you to recommend this product to your friend or family on a scale of 0 to 10? And very powerful, very used metric. Many would say a very overused metric, very myopic metric. It relies on surveys, which, as we've mentioned, can be very problematic and challenging. And not only that, it still gives you a sense of what people say, not what they do. And so net searcher sentiment instead replicates that same idea using search data, where we understand who are folks that are searching around when people are searching for your brand, how many of those people are searching using terms that are positive versus terms that are negative? And then what's that net? What's that difference? And that gives us net searcher sentiment, which is really this metric that at a glance lets you understand the overall sentiment towards your brand using people's actual search behavior, not the things that they're saying in a survey. So we brought that in here and leveraged it using Net Promoter Score with the specific exposed markets to bring that geo-based analysis. And the results were very powerful. So 34% overall increase in searches for the brand, which is always good to raise brand awareness. But not only that, the sentiment towards their brand shifted 15% points up. So a real strong improvement in how people view the brand in a very positive way. The campaign was effective at essentially shifting perception, shifting sentiment very positively for the brand, which is a very strong result for them, because that was the number one goal that they had with this, is that they wanted to improve in market sentiment towards the brand. So being able, in this case, CTV campaign, being able to understand the effect of a CTV campaign in improving not just awareness, which is a very common outcome metric, but sentiment towards your brand is a real powerful tool in your tool belt. Not only that, but some added benefits, we're able to understand that folks had an 11% improvement in how much they associated the brand with the concept of innovation, and a 149% improvement in associating the brand with the concept of expertise. So once again, very strong results, only possible by combining this concept of net searcher sentiment and search intelligence overall with geo-based analysis. So that's what we have in terms of case studies. And now, how about we open up to questions, Marissa?
Sounds good. Well, first, let me say thank you so much. What a great presentation. I learned a ton. I mean, it was so interesting for me to hear all of the different opportunities and challenges that you described with different measurement tactics. We now know your thoughts on surveys, but it was also
cookies.
And cookies, of course. I mean, we've been talking about cookies for how many years at this point?
Yeah.
I will be very interested to see which day they actually go away. I think we'll have to mark our calendars for that one. But also great case studies. It's always great to hear those real world examples and to see the studies that you all conducted at Captify. And of course, that story about the whales, the cashiers. If anything, I now need to be more responsible to bring those loyalty cards so they can get more accurate data on my purchases.
Well, thank you for fighting a good fight, Marissa.
I will.
Appreciate that. Yeah, as an analyst, we appreciate the data.
Thank you. And it's only going to help so that these brands can market more effectively to me, and I will get relevant messaging.
That's right. That's all we want, right? As a consumer, we just want relevant messaging.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, let's get to those questions. And thank you so much for our audience for engaging. There's still time, so if you do have any questions, please just put it into the chat window. The first question: how will AI affect measurement solutions?
Great question. Obviously, you can't open any kind of newspaper. I guess opening a newspaper is kind of an antiquated term these days anyway. You can't turn on the news, you can't go online, you can't avoid hearing AI wherever you're going. And it's obviously a big topic, an important topic, and it's gonna shift a lot of what we do. What it's not gonna change though is the importance of having strong experiment framework and good measurement at the end of the day, as I mentioned, is about nailing the fundamentals of a measurement framework. Now, AI can help provide guidance. We've actually used tools like ChatGPT to make suggestions in terms of strong ways of setting up certain experiments and ideas around doing it. So it can definitely help like that, but it's not going to replace the importance of a good measurement framework and a good experiment setup. Yeah, good question.
That's interesting. You know, as you said, there's not a day that goes by where we don't hear about AI multiple times a day. So very interesting to hear how it will affect these measurement solutions. I mean, in regards to something like cross-screen, we're all on so many devices every single day. How do these measurement methods account for cross-channel activity? Can they support an omni-channel strategy?
Yeah. Great question. So I'd first say that when we're talking about brand measurement, which is really the focus of our conversation today, if you're not thinking about your message across all of your channels, it's going to be very tough because your brand is ultimately that combination of every exposure that someone's having to you. Consumers aren't thinking about your brand in terms of email separately, then they're thinking about it in terms of your paid media, in terms of your your TikTok strategy. So if you're not thinking about your measurement in terms of cross-channel, you're going to get perhaps misleading results. Now, this is an additional challenge about cookies, where cookies are very silent. Cookies are going to be very specific to that one channel that one specific part of your campaign, not even your full campaign. And so this is another shortcoming with cookies. Now, the good news for those who joined us here today and what this is going to help you in your careers is if you're able to use something like search, if you're able to use something like geo, if you have that set up in a holistic way that includes your channels by having the appropriate geo experiment that includes your channels, you're going to be able to include that in your measurement. That's going to come as part of the rest that you're doing. So you're covered. So that's really good news. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, we talked about omni-channel. So in thinking about other multiples, if you had multiple media campaigns running, how would you isolate or attribute which media or which combination of media is best contributing to these goals? Because at the top of your presentation, you talked about the importance of aligning with the business goals. So tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, great question. So we talk, this conversation has been about holistic goals, right? We've been talking holistically, how are you looking at your brand across all of your channels? But you're absolutely right that we need to understand not just the holistic view of the brand, but how is each piece contributing to the whole? And you need to view this as a series of experiments within experiments. That would be my advice to you, is each one of these channels that you're running and each sub part of it, the way that you're going to be able to measure it is by thinking it as a distinct experiment that rolls up to your master experiment. So think about the location, think about the way that you can use geo as setting up controls and exposed groups for each part of it. So have specific geos that you've agreed to go dark on that you're going to treat as your control. Either go dark or show a placebo creative that's a suggested way of doing it. And then have it roll up, and each part of it, you can then see the pieces, and then you can see the whole by looking at holistically. So yeah, it's going to roll up to an experiment within experiments is how you're going to look at how you're going to do that. Yeah.
Well, getting a little bit more specific, let's talk about social data. So how would a source of data like that, what type of measurement capabilities would be aligned to social data?
Yeah, great question. So, and I guess I did bring up TikTok, so I can understand this one. So when I think about social data, and I think the comparison here is thinking about it as a different data source compared to search data. Social data is powerful. Obviously, seeing what people are talking about can be very alluring. The problem that I have with social data is it has a performative aspect to it, where some people are genuinely posting how they feel and all of that, but a lot of people are trying to go viral. They're trying to make a point. They're trying to break out of the crowd. And so I think that brings a lot of noise to the signal here. And it doesn't give you, it gives you kind of a murkier view of what's going on compared to something like search, where you're not performing for well, I hope you're not performing for your web browser, but that's, I guess, your choice.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. We got a number of questions on location. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about that. How do you know location studies are accurate?
Yes, great question. So I did kind of rail on cookies a lot earlier, and I do think that they're very challenging, very problematic, and very myopic, but we do still have cookies to an extent. And so while we do them, we have done work to validate the measurement-based exposure groups against the data we see in a cookie-based environment, and they do largely line up. So that's given us the comfort level that the location-based approach is ultimately valid. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's helpful for that confidence. Getting a little bit more technical, how do you know if the location is accurate of that person or if they're using a VPN?
Yeah, great question. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we are at the mercy of the data coming in. And so this is an incredibly important, incredibly valid point, that we don't have the control of the data coming back. And this is ultimately true of any data that we're getting online, is we're at the mercy of what someone's web browser is sending back to us. So we do have that challenge, that additional challenge in terms of a VPN or some other aspect, either less likely to be malicious, more likely that they're on a network for work, whatever. That could definitely affect your study. So what I would suggest you do is look for outliers in terms of the number of data points coming from specific geos. And we do a lot of work to validate that and clean that up to ensure that it's as crystal a view as possible. If you're seeing an overrepresented number of results from one specific area, that could be a result of a VPN. And so we actually saw this. There were a lot of data points coming in from one specific part of New York City in some initial work that we had done. We ended up excluding that from the work that we're doing, not because we don't like New York City, which is of course where we are right now, but because we thought it was more representative of a VPN situation going on. So I would say you need to be very vigilant about the data you're coming in. Using the techniques I mentioned today does not remove the need to be very careful about that.
Okay, thank you for bringing that one into context as well. So we're going to take one more question today. This is a really timely question. 2 weeks ago, we hit the 5th anniversary of GDPR. So how do you deal with GDPR in locations, specifically IP addresses?
Excellent question. So the conversation that we went through today was definitely taking a more of a US-based approach, where we don't care, but we don't have GDPR is what I meant to say. And so we're not looking at, we have the CCPA, we have other regulations that we do keep in mind, but obviously it's different than what's going on with GDPR. The approach that we're taking to GDPR, because we are, the work that we're doing is ultimately global. So I can say that the work that we're doing in GDPR compliant countries is we're behind the scenes collecting a certain number of data points by geo and only bringing that into our larger data network when it reaches a threshold that ensures anonymity, that ensures that aggregate level, that we don't have data that allows us to personally identify someone. And so we believe this is in the spirit of GDPR. It's really interesting that you brought that up in the vein of IP addresses. There's a lot of conversation about IP addresses going away and all of that. We believe that if that were to happen, there would be other signals that would come in from the browser that would provide location more directly. So we think that using the techniques today, ensuring that they're GDPR compliant works today, and then relying on things like location, which ultimately provides a signal about where you are without being so specific about this is exactly who you are, is a privacy compliant way of modeling this behavior. And that's why we think ultimately it's a future-proof approach.
All right. Sounds future-proof to me. Great strategies. Thank you for
you.
sharing that. And thanks for being here today. This was so much fun to have you in studio. Thank you for the great content. And thanks for answering all those questions. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Marissa.
So let me just take a moment now to tell you a little bit more about what's happening across our media channels here at eMarketer. You can register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, we have a great daily podcast called Behind the Numbers. You can listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts, and check out our newsletters. Finally, keep an eye on your email for the link to today's recording. And thank you all for being here today, for your time. And thanks again to Isaac and the team at Captify. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.